Hey, deserving listeners, let's continue watching the Stutz documentary on Netflix.
And there's no growth, and there's no change, and there's no bravery, and there's no courageousness. We need the negativity of Part X, or else we don't grow.
Yeah, that's correct. It doesn't mean you can't work very hard at a goal.
Again, very common notion within therapy that says the tension, the dialectic between those things like pain and pleasure, maybe. I don't know what the other side of that would be, but that dialectic between discomfort and comfort, the dialectic between certainty and uncertainty, that without one, you can't have the other. Like you can't have love and relational joy without the knowledge that that could fall apart. You can't enjoy life truly without appreciating the fact that you will be dead one day or that death exists. And to deny death is really kind of to deny joy of life. It doesn't really help you to appreciate life, right? And you don't want to fall into despair about death. You want to eventually get to a place where you accept that death and life are both here. They're both realities. And when you accept that, then you can live accordingly and stop avoiding things that you need to accept in reality. So just straight down the middle existential therapy, which is straight down the middle humanistic thought, humanistic psychology thought, which is, I think, what he's talking about.
Doesn't mean you can't succeed, but really, if you want to be happy, because that won't make you happy. What will make you happy is the process. You actually have to learn how to love the process of dealing with those three things.
Yeah, and the way I would describe the way he's describing it is that it's a reframe. We use this term in therapy, family systems therapy as well, but it's a way of looking at it, a way of framing it. It's also kind of narrative therapy. It's also kind of cognitive therapy, also kind of schema therapy. There's a lot of overlap. You can talk about one aspect of psychology or human experience or psychotherapy, and if you understand all the theories well enough, you will be able to say, like, that one thing could be described in 5 different schools of thought that have traditionally hated each other and thought of themselves as completely different from each other. But in reality, they're just different ways of describing a similar thing. They are different things, and they will emphasize different things, and they'll hold things together in different ways. And they have different treatment technique recommendations and protocols. But the philosophy at its foundation, in my view, and to others, is the same. Anyway, so he's talking about how when you frame it that way, you think of it as a good thing, that you can't grow unless you have that dialectic or unless you have pain and uncertainty. You need those things in order to grow. And when you see it that way, when you frame it that, it's not true, right? It's not a scientific objective fact that you can't prove that. It's just a way of looking at it. But when he proposes that to people, and I have too, and again, many therapists will as well, that when you frame it that way, it feels different, right? It feels like ACT is like this as well. Acceptance commitment therapy is along those lines. That when you accept what is, and that gives you the ability to deal with it better. When you're constantly fighting against something, then you will live in that fight against something that will never change. But if you give up the fight and accept it and say, okay, well, now what am I going to do with it, right? Like in a very stark example, if you can't accept your death and you want to deny it and you want to say, I'm not going to die, the way that people will deal with that is to be hypervigilant about their health and to never accept, consciously they understand they're going to die, but they never really fully accept it, right? They never really fully deal with the implications of that, because there are many important implications of the reality that we will all die. You will die, I will die, he will die, Jonah will die. In our American culture, we don't want to acknowledge that because it's morbid or I don't know, but it's reality. There are 2 things in life that are certain, that is death and taxes. So we just have to deal with it, right? That's the saying goes. So when we're fighting against it, we're overemphasizing all the things that we need to do to stave off death, right? We'll be watching all these YouTube videos about superfoods, and we'll be worried constantly about like what we're eating and making sure we're doing this and making sure that we don't get in an accident and all this. And I'm not saying those are bad things, but you're filling your life with all this hypervigilance and fear and activity and then one day you die or you're headed to death and you know it, and you say, I've been wasting my life trying to stay alive forever, and I've never actually fully accepted my death. I'll just talk about for myself. When I fully or started to wrestle with my acceptance of death was in high school. Not for any particular reason. You'd think it's like I would have lost someone, but I didn't. I don't know. It just sort of started to occur to me. There are certain personality profiles that will think about this more often than others, and I come from that. Anyway, so I have been dealing with that throughout my life, and one of the products of that is that I always want to make sure that I'm doing something that's in line with the meaning of my life that I want to do. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the meaning of my life? And this is all existential therapy, by the way, which is humanistic psychotherapy. So in order for me to be in line with my meaning, I have to know my meaning, right? So early on, when I was a teenager and beyond, I went on a journey of exploration of what is the meaning of my life? Why am I on this planet? And once I established that to a satisfactory degree, then I can make sure that I'm not doing anything that is counter to that, right? Like the meaning of my life, which isn't the meaning for everyone's life, but there are certain, it's hard to put into words, but the meaning of my life, as I've determined it up until this point, maybe it'll change in the future, is that I'm put on this planet to make the world a better place in the way that I am doing, right? I don't know if I'm actually succeeding in making the world a better place, but I'm trying. And I insert that because if I depend on me actually succeeding, it might actually give me angst. But I do know that I'm trying, okay? I can control my attempt. I am trying, and I have been trying throughout my career to make the world a better place. And I don't know if I'm succeeding. Some people will tell me that I've succeeded in a way, and so that's very, very gratifying to hear. It's, it's welcomed and appreciated, so that's nice. But I don't want to have to depend on that because I can't know if I'm actually effective or not, right? I can't know if it's going to work, but I can control if I'm trying. So that's one of the meanings of my life. There are other meanings, my marriage, family, creativity, other kinds of things. But anyway, so once I establish those things verbally, but also conceptually in my heart, and it feels right to me. And for a lot of people, they never go on that journey for themselves and don't know the meaning of their life. They're always reacting to what other people want them to be, right? And existential therapists would say, we have a lot to work on if someone was like that. Anyway, so then once I've established the meaning of my life, then as things start to happen to me and certain pressures, right, start pushing me in certain directions, or I start absorbing cultural notions of, like, as a practical example, there are times when I need a new car, for example, and there's a lot of availability out there. And as I've progressed in my career, I can afford nicer cars, right? And there's a temptation there, right? Because I've absorbed culture that says that if you drive a nice car, you're a more respectable, better person. Now, of course, consciously, I don't believe that, but unconsciously, I do. We all believe that. We can't get away from the unconscious absorption of our culture. We have a lot of messages telling us that if someone's driving around in a used 1985 Ford Focus or something that has a door that's painted a different color, that you are a worse person than someone driving in a brand new Lamborghini or something. Now, you might say Lamborghini means D-bag and the other car means, it's complicated, of course, not everyone's the same. But point is that I had that impulse of just like, maybe I should buy an Acura or a Lexus or a BMW or Audi or I don't know, some nice car, Mercedes, this kind of thing. And I thought, well, it'll be more expensive. That's not pleasant. But then very quickly, the meaning of my life kicks in and I'm just like, fuck that shit. Like, that's not, now, if you want to have that car, fine. But for me, that interferes with the meaning of my life. It has nothing to do with the meaning of my life. I'm not here to have an impressive car. Now, I'm not here to have a not impressive car. Like, I want a nice looking car, but I buy a sensible Honda because my name is Honda. It helps to have a name like Honda. But coincidentally, and if Honda was a luxury model, I would like to think that I would buy a Toyota or a Kia or a Hyundai or something. Anyway, so there are millions of decisions in my life that are like that, right? So when we can be in line with our meaning, as I think he's about to get to, as I'm yammering about, then a lot of understanding, to be in pain, for example, to have chronic pain or chronic depression, chronic anxiety, if you're fighting against it, that might actually make it worse. Whereas if you just say, in fact, I did this rather recently with a client that was entering into a depressive episode, and they've been in this, it happens every now and then. Wintertime, it can happen for some people. And what I found was the client was fighting against it, and other people were also fighting against it. And I determined after assessing that fighting against the depressive episode was actually causing way more suffering and potentially compounding the depression than if they just said, look, I guess I'm depressed for a bit of time. And that sounds weird, right? That as a therapist, I would say, accept that you're depressed. Now, it's way more complicated than that. I don't want my client to be depressed. No one wants my client to be depressed, including my client. But the futile fighting against it with the expectation that somehow you're going to be able to snap your fingers and turn something around that's likely to happen regardless is causing way more suffering, right? And way more unnecessary problems. And as we got the client to accept that the depressive episode was, to some extent here to say, temporarily for a couple weeks, months or something, then the depression started to actually go away in significant ways. Still kind of depressed, but not nearly as depressed as before when they were fighting against it the whole time. So when we can accept things, and again, acceptance, commitment therapy, existential therapy, there's a lot of different therapies along this, then we can reduce suffering. And so when we can accept pain and uncertainty and just say, this is how it is. Now, I could go on a longer jag about how humanistic psychology could be argued to be a mechanism of oppressors to keep the oppressed by telling the oppressed that it's all in their mind and it's just a matter of reframing it, and they have to accept the fact that certain things are just the way that they are. And you can't change the world, but you can change yourself. You can change the way you look at it. It's actually a common paternalistic, patriarchal idea that, people with their picket signs, they're always complaining about everything. It's just creating problems for themselves. Like if they just stopped picketing and being activists, then, they'd be better. And yeah, they might be in a better mood. Actually, science might demonstrate that. But the injustice will continue. How about we end the injustice? So it's complicated.
Same clothes every day, pretending it's one session, but it's been years. We're on a green screen. We're not in your office. I'm literally wearing a wig right now to make it look like it was 8 months ago when I had this haircut, and I literally have...
All right, it's interesting. So they were operating on the premise that this was one session, that was the intention, it sounds like, for Jonah Hill, that it would be a documentary about one session. And so as a way to make that more easier, they decided to do it on green screen. They wore the same outfits. He would wear a wig so that it would look like it was the same day. And now Jonah Hill is revealing that that was fake. And they've been shooting this documentary over several months and over many different photo or movie shoots, this kind of thing. And we're learning that they're on green screen. I have to say that green screen was amazing because it didn't look like green screen at all. They're getting good at that. I mean, obviously. So, all right, interesting.
It's just hard to know what is what at this point. But ultimately, I just came to the truth, which is just letting you in on it. Does that feel fucked up?
It feels like the only choice you have, to be honest. In other words, if you want to stay with the truth of me and what we're trying to do, then you have to let yourself fuck it up.
Yeah, I would imagine as a clinician, he probably wouldn't care either way. I mean, I have to say for myself, if I were in his shoes, I'd be like, well, I mean, you're the filmmaker, so I'm just here to do what you want me to do, and I don't know. But yeah, I would not be comfortable and would not actually do this. If Jonah Hill or someone else came to me and said that they wanted to make a fake premise that it was one session, but they were actually going to film over several different days, I'd be like, I can't lie. If someone comes to me and asks me, was it really shot in one day? I'm not going to lie to them. So figure out something. There's got to be another way to do this, right? But either way, yeah, the clinician is saying like, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, it makes sense to me.
I made this movie because I love Phil, because I love the life these tools allowed for me to have. And it doesn't matter what people think about the movie. It just matters that we finished it.
Yeah, I don't know if I showed it, but he said that he wanted to make this movie so other people could also benefit from the tools that he has learned. And I would say that that's possible, that people watching this might understand the tools or the therapy or the techniques, the internal mental techniques that might help people, but probably not. It's complicated, and these kinds of therapies often depend on a therapist really walking through the process with you. And because there's often a ton of barriers, many barriers that people will run into. For example, with some of this stuff, you might talk about, by the way, they've been talking, I haven't been commenting on the majority of the documentary. There's been a lot of different ins and outs. They go into Phil Stutz' childhood, that kind of thing. I took notes. They talked about a shadow part. They did some parts work. They didn't frame it that way, but if you're familiar with that kind of thing, they did that. He asked Jonah Hill to confront a part of himself that he didn't like, but then as they were able to talk between those two parts, integration was possible, which is straight down the middle parts work, which is straight down the middle Gestalt work, which is a subset of humanistic psychotherapy. He also went into some existential talk around you can't do anything about the worries about the future that get into your head. You can only just do something. You can't do anything about the mistakes you've made in the past. You can only do something about what you do today. And that's straight down the middle existential therapy. Existential therapy has a lot of aspects to it, but one of its major pillars is that you need to enact your meaning through action. When I was talking earlier about the meaning of my life and how I'm often considering, does this align with the meaning of my life or not? Because that will make me feel better. Yeah, and the meaning of my life, I didn't derive just because I thought it'd be cool. I actually investigated my needs, my core. The meaning of my life isn't something I just adopted. It's something that emerges from within me. It's an integration of all of my emotions and the possibilities and what I have available to me. If I was in a different situation, the meaning of my life probably would have derived differently. So, like if I was in a non-privileged, social location where I'm being oppressed on a daily basis, the meaning of my life might literally be just survive, right? So because I have the privilege to think about things beyond safety and survival, I have adopted this, I would say, kind of, I have the luxury to consider giving back to society, that kind of thing. But anyway, so when I am thinking about the meaning of my life and the purpose of my life, it's not something that, according to existential therapy, you just sit there and think about. It's actually something that you do. It's the meaning of your life is not through thought or philosophy or emotions. It's through action. Now, thought and emotions and meaning are a part of the action, but the meaning of your life is through behavior. It's what are you doing, right? So he got into some of the talk along those lines. They also did some visualization. There was an interesting visualization that is totally in line with humanistic psychotherapy. You could also argue it's a little bit psychodynamic about the internalizations, interjects, this kind of thing, projective identification. Anyway, but the therapist walked Jonah through this visualization of, envision that, and close your eyes, envision that you're absorbing all the love of the world and you're just being filled with love and goodness. And by the way, they actually tell each other that they love each other, which is a style of therapy, and it's fine to do that, obviously. There are pros and cons to it, and because what if another client hears Phil Stutz saying that he loves Jonah Hill, but maybe Phil Stutz doesn't love one of his other clients? And that's another danger of doing a documentary like this. Now, that doesn't mean the other client is harmed necessarily, irreparably, but it is a consideration. Anyway, but he had Jonah envision that he's absorbing all this love, and then he asked Jonah to think about someone that he hated, some guy that he just hated, and to envision giving that person love, and also that the person is receiving that love. And when you do that, you don't give up your anger necessarily, you don't let go, but you have a different perspective. And yeah, that's another technique within humanistic visualization. Also, they talked to his mom briefly. He talked about his struggles with weight and self-esteem. He talked Jonah for a while. Jonah became kind of the therapist for Phil Stutz, and that was fine, but there are pros and cons to it, right? Some I bet you anything, a lot of therapy, I don't know what the chatter is about this documentary, but I know for a fact that there are many therapists given their school of thought and they're unaware of the other schools of thought, or they downplay the other schools of thought, or they've been taught that those other theories are debunked and pseudoscientific, that when they watch this, they'll see all sorts of ethical problems. They will see that, wait, you can't do that. You can't say that. You can't have, and that's not true. There's a lot of flexibility to what one can do to be helpful and to be ethical. Now, might there be some questionable things that you might raise and say, I think that's a little unethical, maybe, but it depends. So I want to be clear about that as well. So what I'll say is I didn't see anything that was a huge red flag to an ethical violation, other than the thing that I pointed out where it seemed like he was saying he's always right and his techniques always work. That is technically not an ethical statement. You, as a clinician, have the power to define those kinds of things. People don't necessarily know differently. And to say such a thing is false, just literally false. And there's specific lines in our ethical codes that say you can't say that. For example, for psychologists, the American Psychological Association has a code of ethics, and 4.01 states, I'll summarize it, but it basically is saying that any public statement that you make needs to be accurate and not include inaccurate things. And the subsection number 6, it says it is considered an ethical violation or potentially an ethical violation to, they say number 6, the scientific or clinical basis for or results or degree of success of their services, meaning that to say things that are scientifically inaccurate or dubious or questionable in relation to the success of your treatment might be considered an ethical violation. I don't think many people would file a complaint against him for that. I don't think he would be successfully sued for saying what he's saying. The typical things that are granted as an ethical violation to the licensing board or in a civil case are things like exploiting your client by having sex with them, that kind of thing, or fraudulently billing, those sorts of things. Those are obvious ethical and potential legal violations. Saying what he said isn't a high degree of a problem. And I don't even really know what he meant by it. He could have meant, and it's edited, so he could have meant something a little bit different than that. But also, let's see, he had Jonah focus on gratitude, which is another technique used by a lot of different therapists and a lot of different schools of thought. And there was talk about radical acceptance and that sort of thing. But anyway, so there were a lot of things I could have commented on, but I don't know. It felt like I might just be yammering about things. It was interesting.
Yeah, I feel closer to you now than when we started, which I think is a great sign. It's also great luck for me. At age 74. I love you.
I love you.
Yeah, there are therapists and therapies that involve being authentic and saying things like that. They might also say something like, I hate you, that kind of thing. It's complicated. There's a lot of pros and cons. There are ethical codes. There are guidelines around these kinds of things. There are standards of practice within particular schools of thought that guide this sort of thing. You would, of course, want to make sure that you're keeping up to date with consultation, supervision, so that you don't go down a road of convincing yourself that everything you're doing is great and harming clients, but to tell your client that you love them and to have that authenticity. Because if it's real, it looked real, seems genuine, then That's okay, right? It's an expression of care, of bond. Now, the risk is that Jonah will think of his therapist as someone who isn't only a therapist, that is a friend, and then might create some confusion for Jonah that could be harmful to the client. I don't think that's happening, but that is one of the risks. There are many other risks as well that you take with that. But there's a benefit to saying that you love your client. I personally have never said that directly. I don't think. I can't remember having said something like that. I might say something like, I love you as a therapist loves you. I have a lot of feeling for you in my heart, or something like that. I don't know. But I've never said it like that, which is, the way that he's wording it is, it feels very deep and personal, which is also okay. It's just not my style. Now, other therapists would never say anything even close to what is happening right here. And some of those therapists would claim that this is unethical, which it is not, in my opinion. So, and in my experience with licensing boards and with experts in ethics and the standard of practice, in my experience, they would not say this is unethical necessarily. It could result in that if something got out of control, but just what we're seeing here. Now, some of you might be thinking, me and my therapist don't have that kind of talk. I wish my therapist would tell me that they loved me. And okay, and you could certainly talk about that with your therapist, but I think more fundamentally, what is being facilitated here, and maybe what you're seeking if you have that thought, is you want to feel accepted, and maybe that your therapist truly cares in their heart, not like they're just acting like they care, right? So that is a totally viable need that we have in therapy in all relationships, and you can absolutely express the need for that, and somewhat expect that your therapist should pay attention to that. Now, some therapists have a hard time with that. Some therapists don't have a style like that. Some therapists might have countertransference that might interfere with their compassion, but it's complicated. But anyway, let's get back to it.
I still wish you would stop dumping so much shit on me.
Okay, so it ends on a jovial note. And I will say that I've met other therapists who have a very similar style to him, a very radical, honest a way of being, and almost combative. There's a little bit of combativeness in terms of at least what I'm picking up on. The therapist, I think, is half joking, half telling the truth when he's just like, I wish you would stop dumping so much stuff on me. I don't know if that's just a really dry joke that is like ridiculous because it's therapy, and of course clients are supposed to quote unquote dump their stuff on you, or if he is being authentic and saying, I really love you and I care about you, and I wish that you didn't depend on me that much, or I wish you could be more independent maybe, or something. And humanistic psychotherapists will sometimes be that way. They're not necessarily encouraging the relationship to be long-term. It kind of depends. But anyway, interesting documentary. The middle part there I felt like was a little slow to me. The beginning was the most interesting to me, the most relevant to me. Anyway, so yeah, I hope my reaction is understood and at least slightly appreciated, because again, the meaning of my life is to make the world a better place. And if by reacting to this can help people to feel open to seeking the therapy that they deserve and that they need, then that will be in line with my meaning, the meaning of, well, to be specific, that was what I was trying to do. And I think I succeeded in trying. Whether I succeeded in actually affecting anyone, I don't know. But that's what I'm hoping for. I also hope that for you therapists out there that watch, that you can also maybe learn a thing or two about all the different schools of thought, and that there's a lot of flexibility there. And also maybe more generally for us to have red flags about charismatic leaders that claim that they have a monopoly on a particular model of helping, right? Because that's not usually the case. And it's fine that you have someone that has helped someone. Phil Stutz has helped people. Teal Swan apparently has helped people. But everyone should know that a lot of people help people. A lot of people that don't have a megaphone, that aren't in a documentary or on YouTube, are also toiling away, helping lots of people. There are thousands of therapists, even in my area, that are on a daily basis working really hard to help people, one person at a time, one system at a time. And they don't get much recognition or any recognition. And I want to applaud all of those people. If you're one of those people, I absolutely commend you. You deserve a tremendous amount of thanks. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.